War makes ordinary men into heroes, but not all of them choose the path of goodness and order on their way to heroism. Some men prefer chaos, and rebellion is fully embedded in their DNA.
One of those heroes. War service is the stuff of legend.
Well, I'm not a hero, I'm just a survivor.
Of the many soldiers who served in the United States military during the Second World War, an elite team stands out. Not just for their impact during the war, but also for their ragtag behavior and outlaw vibe. This is the story of the Filthy 13, the secret soldiers the U.S. was afraid to send to war. Jake McNasty McNeese, the man behind the mayhem. There are people who were literally born for mayhem, and James McNeese was one of them, if not the very best to ever come out of World War II. Now, if you're not all too familiar with the stories of the World Wars, there's a good chance you don't know who this guy is. So allow us to take you through the history of one of the most enigmatic figures to ever serve in the United States military. Although his story is not your typical good soldier hero kind of story. This is more of a ragtag, rebellious, nonconformist soldier who rose in ranks despite being one of the most disobedient and controversial men in the military at the time. Are you ready to have your mind blown? Then let's dive into the history of this larger-than-life character. Early life. On May 24, 1919, the family of Eli Hugh and Rebecca McNeese was blessed with their 9th child, a lovely boy whom they named James Elbert McNeese. Nice name, right? Except that's probably the only nice thing about this man, and as you can tell from the nickname, McNeese was as nasty as advertised. But he was a sweet little boy once with dreamy eyes and a cute smile. But he was born during the Great Depression, so those dreamy eyes soon became wary with work, stress, and the need to make ends meet. As the economic hardship bit harder, the family moved to Ponca City in Oklahoma in 1931. This was to be their final destination, and in 1939, James McNeese had already graduated from high school. But he didn't go straight into the military. No, not yet. He first explored a career in road construction, but that didn't really seem to catch his fancy. So he dropped it and went to work at the Pine Bluff Arsenal, a place as explosive as McNeese's character. There, he got his hands on a few explosives and learned how they worked. This would eventually prove vital during his time in the military. But something dramatic was about to happen that would alter the course of McNeese's life forever. Who knew at the time that this young boy would become a national icon, outstanding in his own class? Military career. Like a thief in the night, World War II struck, and everyone was getting enlisted. Morale was high, and every young man wanted to be a heroic American soldier, or at least most of them did. You would expect that McNeese would instantly jump into the arms of the military, where he would be able to fully express his exceptional abilities. But nope. Due to the fact that McNeese was working with the fire department at the time, he wasn't forced to enlist. But you can keep a man like McNeese out of trouble for too long. He was like a magnet for trouble. He knew this, and he exploited it well. He even earned a reputation for being such a huge troublemaker, and it was one of these shenanigans that eventually got him into trouble with the law. His journey to the military started after a bar brawl. In order to get the police off his back and to avoid being sent to jail, McNeese decided to join the military. His knowledge of explosives, coupled with the demolition knowledge he had acquired during his time as a fireman, would eventually prove instrumental in his astronomical success in the military. So in September 1942, McNeese found himself standing in front of a skeptical sergeant in Toccoa training camp. From the very first day, it was obvious that this guy was different. There was just something about him that stood out. As the training progressed, McNeese began to catch the attention of his superiors both positively and negatively. On one hand, he was a really good soldier and performed excellently in every aspect of training. He wasn't afraid of tackling any task placed before him, and he always found a way to blow everyone's minds. But on the other hand, he had such an explosive personality that it was hard to grasp how someone so bad could be so good. From his very first week, it was obvious that he was trouble. After he witnessed a plate of butter being eaten before it reached his table, he got up and decided to complain to the mass sergeant. But this wasn't a dignified complaint. Instead, The two men were exchanging some fighting words, which eventually led McNeese to launch at the man. Thankfully, his friends held him back before he could damage the sergeant's face. But in typical McNeese fashion, he went looking for the man 2 days later, found him alone, and beat him to a pulp. For the first of many, many more times, McNeese found himself in the place he would later call home, the stockade. But there was more trouble brewing within this young man. For example, initially, McNeese was always absent from retreat. When confronted by his superior, McNeese would reply with sarcasm and quote his adopted religion of the Choctaw Indian as his excuse for not saluting the flag. He would lecture his sergeant about religious freedom before leaving him to report to the next chain of command. Surprisingly, after a heated debate between McNeese and the company commander, the captain gave him a direct order to never miss retreat again despite his obligations, and to everyone's astonishment, he never missed retreat again. What a strange young man, right? The birth of the Dirty Five. As the saying goes, trouble loves company. A man like McNeese couldn't definitely have been a long ranger. He had many fans who loved his wild antics and wanted to associate with him. The conditions of their base were despicable, but these guys didn't really care about appearances. This was evident in the fact that they chose to conserve water for cooking and drinking and would go days without taking a shower. This earned them the nickname, the Dirty Five. What started as an act of mockery eventually became an iconic emblem. But these guys weren't just famous for their unhygienic lifestyle. What made them well known was their notorious habits. Off base, these guys got drunk and would fight anyone who was willing to take them on. On one of those occasions, McNeese and his buddies got into a brawl with two military police officers. As the MPs tried to bring their nightsticks down on one of McNeese's friends, he got involved in the fight. He grabbed one of the sticks and beat the two officers to a pulp. He then proceeded to disarm them and discharged their weapons into the streetlights. As you would have guessed, this event sent him back to the stockade, and he was the only person in his group who was not promoted to private first class. The birth of the legendary paratroopers. Legends are made, they are not born. The United States paratroopers are a group of ragtag soldiers who would be dropped into conflict zones dangling from their parachutes as enemy fire surrounds them. They risked their lives to provide support for the ground troops, or in the case of an impending invasion. Where else would you expect an explosive man like McNeese to belong, except for this elite team of heroic men? Although when you look at his personality, it's hard to figure out why his superiors overlooked his faults and honored him with the paratrooper wings. But is it really that hard to figure out? After all, this was a soldier like no other. Even though he had issues with following rules, he was good on the field and would eventually prove himself to be an invaluable asset. So faults and all, Jake McNeese became a member of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne Division. Things were looking good. Finally, he could engage with Hitler's army, who hated him with much passion. The birth of the Filthy 13. In preparation for their operation, McNeese and his crew arrived in Great Britain on September 15, 1943, and the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment started setting up billets in various parts of southern England. There they began training immediately, and everything was as physical as it could be. But McNeese and his 12 other friends had other plans. They would get so wasted in the night that they would still be drunk by the time they reported for training in the morning. Even though the regiment viewed discipline as a huge priority, McNeese always found a way to upset the system. He was a rebel in every sense of the word, and once again found himself in the stockade many, many times. This guy and his buddies were so rebellious they didn't even salute their superior officers. Imagine the audacity. But they were too valuable to be dismissed, so the officers put up with them. These guys care nothing for their looks and always appeared unshaven and filthy from the black dust that followed them from their quarters. So you shouldn't really be surprised how they got the nickname the Filthy 13. Now it's time for today's subscriber pick. For many years, the story of this team of misfits and rejects has inspired many. They stood up during the war and made a name for themselves. Their impacts will forever be remembered as instrumental to the way the war later turned out. They risked life and limb as they went for every single jump, unsure of whether they would be able to make it back alive. With determination in their eyes and their distinct mohawk hairstyle and stripes on their face, they sent chills down the spines of the enemies and took the United States and its allies to the winning side of the war. Drop a comment to pay your respect to these veterans. Now that we're done with that, let's get back to the video. The Normandy Jump. There are operations that transform simple soldiers into icons, and for the Filthy 13, the invasion of Normandy in Nazi-occupied France was their jackpot. The men anticipated the invasion with so much enthusiasm. Morale was very high and everyone was in good spirits. McNeese was assigned as the head of the demolition group, the Filthy 13, who were tasked with landing behind enemy lines before the day of the invasion, holding off a bridge, or bombing it if it fell into the hands of the enemies. A simple mission, right? Except for the fact that most of them would not even make it to the ground. As McNeese prepared to board the warplanes that would carry them to their destinations, he spawned a strange look. Using the razor that was part of his first aid kit, McNeese shaved his hair into a mohawk style and painted his face with a mix of the white paint used to make stripes on the planes in order to distinguish them from enemy planes, and the black paint that the rest of the crew were using for camouflage. When the rest of the Filthy 13 saw this, they were very perplexed and asked their rebel leader why he chose this look. In response, Jake McNeese told them his choice of camouflage was a homage to his ancestry. His mother was a Choctaw Indian, and according to their culture, warriors would shave their heads in Mohawk style whenever they went to war and claimed the scalps of their enemies as war trophies. His buddies at the story hook, line, and sinker. Except this wasn't the only reason McNeese decided to style his hair this way. As he later revealed, McNeese claimed his choice of hairstyle was due to the lice outbreak in France, which made him want to keep as little hair on his head as possible. But this iconic look became the stuff of legend back home. The images of McNeese, painting the faces of his comrades as they prepared for a journey most of them never returned, became a perfect description of the rugged American soldier. It was a calm night as the plane carrying McNeese and the rest of the Filthy 13 drifted through the night sky on its way to Normandy. But as McNeese and his men knew, this was just the calm before the storm. His group was the last to reach Normandy, and by the time they got there, things were not as they had planned. It was war in the skies. Anti-aircraft fire filled the skies. Planes were losing altitude left, right, and center. It was mayhem everywhere you looked. But McNeese encouraged his men. He charged them to be strong and be ready to jump, even though it was quite premature. This was even more exacerbated when a shrapnel hit their aircraft, narrowly missing McNeese by inches. Even though his life was spared, trouble was brewing in paradise. The shrapnel had hit the reserve parachute of one of McNeese's men. Fortunately, they were all able to jump and deploy their parachutes before the plane erupted in flames. Although they all jumped, not all of them made it to the ground, and some who even made it to the ground were killed as soon as they touched down. It seemed the mission was a complete disaster, but this was expected. McNeese himself had fantasized about this moment, when he would land and become a lone ranger, free from any superior commander. Maybe he could even engage one or two Nazi soldiers in hand-to-hand combat. He was pretty confident that he would be the last man standing. Alone, McNeese walked through the night, wary of enemy soldiers, before he eventually linked up with a couple of other soldiers from another group who had also lost the rest of their crew. He instantly became their temporary head. Along he went, picking up any displaced soldier he found as they headed to their destination. Their task was to secure the bridges near Carrington in preparation for D-Day. Most of his buddies were presumed dead, but this wasn't time to mourn. It was a time to march, and onward they marched. The men blew up a couple of bridges and other infrastructure on their way. Eventually, they reached the bridge, and they defended it with their very lives. Unfortunately, all their efforts were laid to waste after the bridge was bombed by the U.S. government. Authorities had believed that the mission was a failure, and everyone on site was dead as a dodo, so they decided to bomb the bridge through an aerial attack instead. Luck for McNeese and his men, they were securely positioned, so they survived the onslaught. Jack Wmer. But McNeese wasn't the only member of the Filthy 13 to have survived. Way over on the other side, there was another member of the Filthy 13 who had survived the jump and was also traveling on his own, looking for friendly faces. His story is also worth mentioning. His name was Jack Wmer. As Operation Overlord progressed, Wmer also found himself alone behind enemy lines. Things weren't looking so good, but he made it out alive, even saving the lives of many other soldiers. His commando training played a huge role in his survival, and he also later participated in the Battle for Holland or Operation Market Garden, as well as the Battle of the Bulge, all of which he came out of alive. After Jake McNice was promoted from the head of the Filthy 13, Wmer assumed the position. What's more, Wmer was also part of this elite team of soldiers who made an advance on Hitler's home in Berchtesgaden, Germany. All of these were achieved with his fellow Filthy 13 soldiers. By the time of his death on December 28, 2013, at the ripe age of 13, he was the only living member of the Filthy 13. Operation Market Garden. Following the success of the D-Day invasion, McNeese and his demolition team were once again called upon for another mission, codenamed Operation Market Garden. This was the beginning of the end of World War II. The operation kick-started on September 17, 1944, and ended on September 25. Conducted by the United States Army in collaboration with the Allied forces, the mission was to invade Nazi-occupied Netherlands. Historians regard this operation as the largest airborne operation of the war. The mission was a double-edged sword. Market, the first part, was the airborne assault by the 1, 01st, and 82nd paratroopers of the British and American armies. This was where McNice and his men came in. Their role was to paratroop into the enemy territories in order to establish an invasion route to facilitate Allied movements from the Belgian border to Nijmegen, Holland, via Eindhoven. Although many consider Operation Market Garden a massive failure and often regarded as one of the major setbacks of the Allies during the Second World War, it was actually quite successful. This was thanks to McNice's Filthy 13's courageous efforts. They blew up bridges, secured waterways, destroyed even more bridges, and captured some. They were also very instrumental in the capture of the city of Eindhoven. Not impressed yet? You should also know that this ragtag team completed a task that was scheduled for 6 days within 36 hours. How astonishing. Although throughout the mission, the Filthy 13 earned a reputation for getting into trouble. Their amazing performance made up for their explosive personality. Take, for example, after the 101st Airborne Division cleared a highway that led from Eindhoven to Veghel during the operation, the 506th Parachute Infantry Regimental Command Post then left McNeese and his ragtag team of Filthy 13 to guard the 3 critical bridges situated on the Eindhoven Canal. This was a testament to the mutual understanding that existed between comrades during the way and a proof of the level of excellence with which the Filthy 13 worked on the battlefield. Love them or hate them, you can't deny the fact that they were the best, and they knew it. The Pathfinder Offer. How much of a menace do you have to be for your superiors to collectively want you out? Maybe as notorious as Jake McNeese. In December 1944, his superiors decided they had had enough of his trouble and offered him a chance to be a part of the pathfinding service. We know this may sound like a promotion, but it really wasn't. You see, the pathfinding service consisted of a group of soldiers who were the first to be dropped into conflict zones. Everyone knew it was a suicide mission, which was why enlisting into this elite force was by volunteering. How dangerous was this mission? Well, so dangerous that only 80% of the paratroopers make it to the ground. Now, a Pathfinder team consisted of a stick of 10 men, so this means just 2 of them were expected to survive and complete the mission. Do you understand the extent of the danger associated with this team now? By now, it was obvious that they really wanted him gone. But you know McNeese, he doesn't back down from a challenge. After considering for a little while, McNeese decided to volunteer for the dangerous mission. As soon as his men saw him packing his bags to leave for the training camp of the Pathfinder service, all his men were so touched and inspired. They also immediately began to pack their bags because they couldn't afford to watch their leader risk his life alone. This was a testament to the positive impact he had on his men. All the Pathfinder volunteers were promptly transferred to the 9th Troop Carrier Command Pathfinders, Chalgrove, England. Immediately they got to the camp, McNeese began to shine bright like the star that he was. Company Commander Captain Frank Brown immediately made him the acting first sergeant. This was also due to the fact that McNeese had been in combat since the Normandy mission, and Brown was confident that McNeese would be able to prepare the men for any future Pathfinder mission. But nothing could have prepared McNeese or the rest of the Filthy 13 for what was about to happen next. The surprise mission to Bastogne. In case you're wondering why McNeese decided to opt for a mission that was definitely tantamount to suicide, you should remember that we are talking about a very smart man here. Obviously, he wouldn't make such a decision without having a hidden agenda, and of course he did. In reality, Jack McNasty McNeese believed that by the time his Pathfinder training would have ended, the war would have been over. This meant that he wouldn't have to risk his life in another jump. Unknown to him, he and his men were about to be dealt the rudest shock ever. On December 23, 1944, Lieutenant Schrabel Williams approached McNeese and informed him to prepare his team for a combat jump that afternoon. Surprise! Surprise! Seems Mr. McNasty here had one more dance with death before he would finally retire. According to Williams, the 101st was cut off in Bastogne and was unable to resupply important items like medicine, food, and ammunition. At this point, you're probably wondering why every superior who McNeese worked under deemed him worthy of leadership positions. Despite his obviously flawed character, he always found himself at the top of every team he found himself. Surely, he must be doing something right. In reality, McNeese was selected as the acting first sergeant due to the fact that he had proven himself to be tactically and technically competent since the Normandy landing. His leadership skills were also demonstrated when he was able to assemble a team of competent Pathfinders within just 10 days of arriving in Chalgrove, England. As McNeese and his team pulled up to the tarmac just minutes before takeoff, the flight commander pulled out a map and showed them where Bastogne was. Then, he made a powerful mission statement. It went something like this. "That's Bastogne. Your division is cut off and completely surrounded, at least they were the last time we heard from them. We haven't heard from them in 2 days. Whether they're still there or not, I don't know. All indications are they still are. You're going to jump in there on a resupply mission. They are out of ammunition, medicine, and food. They have nothing left but a handful of men. We have to maintain and control Bastogne to prevent the blitzkrieg from succeeding." But these guys didn't really know where they were going. McNeese and his rugged men had so little understanding of their operational environment, but they did what they had always done since the start of the war. They went to war with a high morale and a level of confidence that was higher than the Eiffel Tower. Because McNeese understood the gravity of the situation, he recommended that 2 Pathfinder teams be sent on the mission. This was because if one aircraft got shot down, the other one could go on to achieve its objectives. Therefore, McNeese led 2 Pathfinder teams of 20 men on the way to Bastogne to an uncertain future and a more certain possibility of death. This was where this iconic soldier showed how impressive he really was and cemented his legacy for life. We told you earlier that embarking on a Pathfinder's mission carried just 20% of survival, so only 4 of these 20 men were expected to survive and finish the mission. But McNeese and his men absolutely shattered these survival odds. At the end of the day, only 1 soldier was lost, and 19 of the 20 survived. Even though McNeese and his team were not provided with aerial photography of Bastogne or the potential enemy positions. He was also devoid of radio communication with the commander on the ground. Despite these concerns, McNeese was able to carefully navigate his way as the truly exceptional leader that he was, and he preserved the lives of his men. Because of his efforts and that of his men, the Air Corps was able to drop more than 600 plane loads of much-needed ammunition, food, gas, and medical supplies into Bastogne. No wonder this soldier has become a symbol of American pride and determination. After the war, McNeese became an observer with the 17th Airborne Division during Operation Varsity. It is amazing how he was able to survive so many jumps. In 2012, Jake McNeese received the French Legion of Honor Chevalier class. Private James Elbert Jake McNeese died on January 21, 2013, at the ripe age of 93. The other members of this ragtag crew, known as the Filthy 13, deserve a mention. They include, in no particular order, Jack Agnew, George Baran, Roland Frenchy R. Baribeau, Robert S. Cohn, Charles Darnell, John Dewey, Charles G. N., James F. Green, John Hale, James E. Leach, Louis Lipp, Thomas Lonergan, Max Majewski, Miguel Marquez, Lieutenant Charles Mellon, Frank Milan, John H. Moore, Joseph Oleskowitz, Frank Pallas, Herb Pierce, Charles Plowda, George Radica, Andrew Rasmussen, Brinsley Stroop, Clarence Ware, Tom Young, William Code, and Jack Hawkeye Wmer. This list includes both the original Normandy crew and the newer members of Operation Overlord and their other operations. This elite team of soldiers has been idolized in pop culture. They even have a movie made based loosely on their stories, although they were grossly misrepresented by the Hollywood depictions. Although they were way different from your ordinary crew of soldiers, the Filthy 13 cemented their legacy during World War II, and their names have forever been etched in the sands of time. Thank you for watching this video. See you in the next one.